There is a cave near the top of the world. It sits at 8,500 meters on the north side of the highest mountain on Earth, tucked into a shelf of limestone just below the summit ridge. For almost 20 years, everyone who passed it knew the same thing. Inside lay a man in bright green boots, curled against the rock, frozen exactly as he fell. Climbers used him as a landmark. They would check their watches when they reached him. Turn around, they told themselves, if you are not at the green boots by a certain hour. A dead man became a milestone, a clock made of a corpse. For 3 decades, the climbing world believed it knew his name. In 2026, DNA testing revealed they had been wrong the entire time. This is a story about a mountain that does not give back what it takes. About the strange arithmetic of a place where reaching the goal is only half the danger, and the descent is where the dying is done. About the roughly 200 human beings still lying frozen on its slopes, and the living who walk past them every single season on their way to the summit and their way back down. The world thinks it knows Everest, the postcard peak, the pyramid of snow against a hard blue sky, the trophy. But Everest is not a trophy. It is a graveyard that happens to have a view. Welcome to Chomolungma, Goddess Mother of the world. Let us climb. Start with the number, because the number is the whole story. Everest stands 8,848.86 meters above sea level. 29,032 feet. Higher than any point on the planet. So high that its summit pierces into the jet stream, into winds that can exceed 200 miles an hour, into an atmosphere so thin that a human being placed there without bottled oxygen would lose consciousness in minutes and die not long after. The top third of Everest has a name among mountaineers. They call it the death zone. Above 8,000 meters, the air holds roughly a third of the oxygen you are breathing right now. Your body begins, quite literally, to die. Cells starve. Judgment blurs. The blood thickens as it floods with extra red cells, straining the heart. You cannot acclimatize to the death zone. You can only survive it briefly, on borrowed time, racing a clock that never stops. The mountain has many ways to end a life, and 2 of them have clinical names. The first is HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema, when the brain swells against the skull. Its victims grow confused, lose coordination, sometimes strip off their clothing in the delusion that they are burning hot, and wander off the route into the dark. The second is HAPE, high-altitude pulmonary edema, when the lungs fill with fluid and a climber begins, in effect, to drown standing up, on dry land, 5 miles above the sea. But altitude illness is only part of the ledger. Avalanches have killed something on the order of 77 people here. Falls take others, so do exhaustion, hypothermia, dehydration, and cardiac arrest. In fact, many deaths above 8,000 meters are recorded with no single clear cause at all, because there rarely is one. It is usually all of it at once, converging on a tired body in air that cannot sustain it. And there is a phrase experienced climbers use for the summit itself. They call it the halfway point, because standing on top means nothing if you cannot get back down. And the descent, when you are drained and starved of oxygen and every cell is screaming, is when most of the dying is done. Since record-keeping began with the first British attempt in 1922, at least 340 people have died trying to climb this mountain. The exact figure is disputed because the climbing world has never fully agreed on what to count. Some tallies reach 344, some 346. The Himalayan database, the authoritative archive records 339 deaths through the end of the 2025 season. Whatever the precise number, the shape of it is clear. And here is the part that stays with you. Of those hundreds of dead, an estimated 200 bodies remain on the mountain, still there, right now, preserved by cold so complete it works like embalming. Some are buried under snow and ice, some have vanished into crevasses, and some lie in the open, in their faded down suits, exactly where they died, becoming part of the landscape they came to conquer. The mountain keeps them. That is not a metaphor. Above 8,000 meters, retrieving a body is one of the most dangerous tasks in all of mountaineering. A single recovery can cost between $30,000 and $70,000, and it puts the lives of the retrieval team at extreme risk. And no, you cannot simply fly up and collect them. It is true that in May 2005, a French test pilot named Didier Delsalle did something no one had ever done. He landed a helicopter on the summit of Everest, touched down for nearly 4 minutes, then did it again the next day to prove it was no fluke. It remains the only confirmed helicopter landing on the top of the world, and it pushed the machine far past its certified ceiling of around 7,000 meters. But it was a stunt, in the finest sense of the word. It was not a rescue. In real operations, the thin air, the swirling winds, and the sheer lack of engine power mean helicopters work the lower slopes and stop well short of the summit. So every corpse up there must be chipped from the ice by hand, sometimes with axes, sometimes with boiling water, and then lowered down the same lethal slopes the person died climbing. So most are left, and the living keep coming. Why? That is the question at the center of this entire story. Why walk past the dead to stand somewhere you cannot survive? Hold on to that question. We will spend the next hour answering it. To understand the mountain, you first have to understand that it was here long before it had a summit worth climbing, long before it had a name in English. Roughly 50 million years ago, the Indian tectonic plate, drifting north across an ancient sea called the Tethys, collided with the Eurasian plate. It did not stop. It kept pushing, and it is still pushing today, at a rate of a few centimeters a year, about as fast as your fingernails grow. The seabed between the two plates had nowhere to go but up. It buckled and folded and rose. And here is the detail that should reorder your sense of the place entirely. The rock that forms the very summit of Everest is a band of limestone geologists call the Komolangma Formation, laid down on the floor of that warm, shallow ocean. It is full of the fossilized shells of sea creatures, trilobites and crinoids, and the tiny remains of marine life that swam here when this was seabed. On the highest point on Earth, 5.5 vertical miles above the modern ocean, there are the bones of animals that lived at the bottom of the sea. Let that settle. Every climber who has ever stood on the summit of Everest was standing on an ancient ocean floor, lifted into the jet stream by the slow, unimaginable violence of two continents colliding. The mountain is not just tall, it is inside out. The bottom of the world raised to the top of it. The mountain is still rising. GPS measurements show Everest gaining height at roughly 2 millimeters a year. And in 2024, scientists from University College London published a startling explanation for part of that growth. About 89,000 years ago, a river some 75 kilometers away, the Arun, was captured by another river system in an event geologists call drainage piracy. The strengthened current began carving out an enormous gorge, stripping away billions of tons of rock. As that weight was removed, the Earth's crust rebounded upward, like a ship rising when its cargo is unloaded. That rebound, the researchers calculated, has lifted Everest an extra 15 to 50 meters over those millennia, and it lifts it still. Think about what that means. The mountain that kills climbers with its height is being pushed higher, right now, by a river most of them will never see. Nature does not care about the summit. Nature is not even finished building it. The people who lived in its shadow understood something of this indifference. To the Tibetans on the northern side, the mountain was Chomolungma, goddess mother of the world. To the Nepalis on the south, it was Sagarmatha, forehead of the sky. It was sacred. It was not a thing you climbed. It was a thing you revered from below. The name Everest came later, and from far away. In the 1850s, a British survey of India calculated the height of a distant peak they had labeled, without ceremony, Peak XV. When the numbers came back showing it was the tallest thing on Earth, they named it after George Everest, the former Surveyor General of India, a man who, by most accounts, never even saw the mountain that would carry his name for the rest of human history, and who reportedly objected to the honor. His name was not even pronounced the way we say it now. So the mountain has 3 names. 2 of them belong to the people who prayed to it. One belongs to a man who mapped it from a distance and did not want the credit. And still it rises. The year is 1924. 2 men in tweed and hobnailed leather boots are climbing into the clouds near the summit of Everest, from the Tibetan side. George Mallory, 37, the most famous mountaineer of his age, and Andrew Irvine, called Sandy, just 22, an Oxford student who had been chosen partly for his skill with the temperamental oxygen equipment of the era. At around 12:30, a fellow expedition member named Noel Odell glimpsed them through a break in the mist, high on the ridge, moving strongly toward the top. Then the cloud closed, and they were never seen alive again. Did they reach the summit 29 years before Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay would plant the first confirmed footprints there in 1953? It is one of the great unsolved mysteries in the history of exploration. Mallory had told a reporter, when asked why he wanted to climb Everest, the most famous 3 words in mountaineering, because it is there. There were clues, over the years, that only deepened the riddle. In 1933, a later British expedition found an ice axe high on the northeast ridge, widely believed to be Irvine's, marking the spot where something had gone terribly wrong. And in 1979, a Chinese climber named Wang Hongbao told a Japanese mountaineer that 4 years earlier, in 1975, he had come across an old body in vintage clothing high on the north side. The next day, before he could be questioned further, Wang was killed in an avalanche. The mountain fed just enough evidence to keep the obsession alive, and never enough to end it. Then, in 1999, a search expedition found Mallory's body, preserved and face down on a rock ledge at 27,000 feet, arms outstretched as if trying to arrest a slide, injuries suggesting a long fall and a rope that had snapped. In his pockets were letters, snow goggles, an altimeter, but not the one thing the searchers most wanted. It is believed that Irvine carried a small vest pocket Kodak camera, and that if its film survived the deep freeze, it might show whether 2 men in tweed had stood on the roof of the world a full generation before Hillary and Tenzing. That camera has never been found, and Irvine himself was still gone entirely. The year is 2024. A National Geographic film team, led by the climber and photographer Jimmy Chin, is walking across the central Rongbuk Glacier below Everest's north face. The ice is melting. It has been melting faster every year, and out of the retreating glacier, something emerges. A boot. Old, cracked leather, studded with the diamond-patterned hobnails of a bygone era. Chin lifts the attached sock and finds a red label stitched into the wool. It reads, A.C. Irvine. Inside the boot was a foot. After 100 years, the mountain had begun, slowly, to give Sandy Irvine back. But not the answer, not the camera, not yet. The central mystery remains sealed in the ice somewhere above. 1 century. That is how long Everest can hold a secret, and it took a warming climate to loosen its grip even that much. What else, you might ask, is the ice still keeping? Let us descend for a moment. Let us breathe. Because the mountain is not only a place of death, it is a living system, and it deserves to be seen as one. At its foot, in the valleys of the Khumbu, live the Sherpa people. They are an ethnic group who migrated from Tibet centuries ago and settled at altitudes that would leave most humans gasping. Their bodies have adapted over generations. Studies have found that Sherpas produce more efficient mitochondria, use oxygen more sparingly, and show a genetic inheritance from the Denisovans, an archaic human lineage, that helps them thrive where the air is thin. They are, in a real sense, built for this place. Higher up, life clings on in ways that seem to defy the mountain's whole logic of death. The Himalayan jumping spider, a creature smaller than your fingernail, has been found living permanently at 6,700 meters, higher than any known animal makes its home, surviving on the frozen insects that the wind carries up the slopes and dumps in the snow. It hunts in a place where a human could not last a day without oxygen. Overhead, bar-headed geese perform one of the most extraordinary migrations on Earth, flying directly over the Himalayas, cresting altitudes near the summit of Everest itself. Their blood carries a form of hemoglobin that binds oxygen more tightly, letting them pull breath from air so thin it would render a person unconscious. They do it twice a year, honking, in formation, above the roof of the world. And below the ridgelines moves the snow leopard, the grey ghost of the high Himalaya, so elusive, so perfectly camouflaged against the rock and snow that for decades, biologists could do little more than guess at how many remained. It kills prey 3 times its own weight. It can leap the length of a small bus. It watches the climbers, most likely, far more often than the climbers ever glimpse it. None of these creatures know the mountain is the tallest. None of them are trying to reach the top. They simply live where they live, at the edge of what is possible, and they have done so for far longer than any human ambition. And then there is the ice itself. The South Col Glacier, sitting at around 8,000 meters, is the highest glacier on the mountain. In 2022, a study of an ice core drilled from it revealed something chilling in a different way. The ice that took roughly 2,000 years to form has been melting away in about 25 years. Decades of accumulation, lost annually. At current thinning rates, even a glacier above 8,000 meters may be gone by the middle of this century. The climbers see it happening in real time. Dorji Gyalgen Sherpa, a guide who has crossed the Khumbu icefall for years, described the change without needing any instrument to measure it. He said a knee-deep stream now runs along parts of the route where there was once only solid ice, that there is no need to break ice for water anymore because it flows freely even at Camp 1, and that the melt now begins rapidly around the second week of May. The men who know the mountain best can feel it softening under their boots. The mountain is warming, and as it warms, it changes what it will and will not keep. Remember that, because we are coming back to it. The year is 1953. On the morning of the 29th of May, a New Zealand beekeeper named Edmund Hillary and a Sherpa named Tenzing Norgay stand where no confirmed human has ever stood, the summit of the world. They spend perhaps 15 minutes there. Tenzing buries small offerings of food in the snow, a gift to the goddess. Hillary takes a photograph of Tenzing holding his ice axe against the sky. There is no photograph of Hillary at the top, because Tenzing had never used a camera, and the summit of Everest was not the place to teach him. That first ascent electrified the world. The news reached London on the morning of Queen Elizabeth's coronation, and the timing gave it the feel of a national omen, a new Elizabethan age, born the day two men reached the top of the earth. Hillary would be knighted. Tenzing, a Sherpa who could not read and had summited in borrowed boots, became a hero across Nepal and India and Tibet, claimed by all of them. There is a small and telling detail in that first summit. When reporters pressed the pair on who had actually stepped onto the top first, Hillary or Tenzing, both men refused, for years, to say. They had reached it together, roped together, and they insisted the distinction did not matter. Tenzing eventually revealed that Hillary had stepped up first, but only, he said, because that is how the rope ran, not because either mattered more than the other. Two men, from opposite ends of the earth, agreeing to share a moment that the whole world wanted to divide. And that ascent opened a door that has never since closed. For decades, Everest remained the province of elite, self-sufficient mountaineers. In 1978, Reinhold Messner and Peter Habeler did what physiologists had called impossible. They summited without bottled oxygen, on lung power alone. 2 years later, Messner did it again, entirely alone. But the door kept opening wider, and in the 1990s, something changed. Commercial guiding arrived. For a large sum of money, companies would take paying clients up the mountain, fixing ropes, carrying loads, managing oxygen, doing the dangerous work so that a client with enough fitness and enough cash could stand on top. Everest became, in a phrase that stings, a mountain you could buy. And with the crowds came the catastrophes. In May 1996, a sudden storm caught multiple commercial expeditions high on the mountain. Late in the day, above the last camp, 8 people died in a single brutal stretch. Among them was Rob Hall, a renowned New Zealand guide, who stayed with a dying client near the summit, long past the point of safety, and then, trapped by the storm, spoke by radio to his pregnant wife, far below, before the cold took him. The disaster was immortalized in John Krakauer's first-hand account, Into Thin Air, and it seared into the public mind an image of Everest as a place where ambition, money, and a narrow weather window could combine to kill even the experts. That year, 15 people died on the mountain in total. The number reflected not a spike in the death rate so much as the sheer volume of people now attempting the climb. And that was the real warning. 1996 was not an outlier. It was a preview. Here is where the story turns dark, and where we meet the dead by name. Because they were people, every one of them. Let us go back to that cave, the one at 8,500 meters, with the man in the green boots. For years, the climbing world believed he was Tewang Paljor, a young officer with the Indo-Tibetan Border Police, who died in that same 1996 storm on the north side. wearing green Koflak boots. His body settled into a limestone alcove that everyone came to call Green Boots' Cave. Every expedition from the north passed him. He became the most famous corpse on Earth, a waypoint, a grim clock. Then, in 2026, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police announced the results of DNA testing. Green Boots was not Tsewang Paljor after all. He was Lance Naik Dorje Morup, a different member of that same doomed 1996 team. For 30 years, thousands of climbers had walked past a man and called him by the wrong name. Think about what that tells you. This is a place so lethal, so indifferent, that we could not even correctly identify one of its most looked-at victims for 3 decades. The mountain does not just take lives. It scrambles identities. It makes strangers of the dead. And the cave holds a second story, darker still. The year is 2006. A 34-year-old English mountaineer named David Sharp is attempting Everest alone, from the north, on a bare-bones budget, without a personal Sherpa and with minimal oxygen. On his descent, exhausted and freezing, he crawls into the same cave. He huddles down beside the frozen body of the man in green boots, and there he begins to die. Over the following hours, an estimated 40 climbers pass the cave on their summit push. Some do not see him in the dark. Some mistake him for Green Boots, the landmark corpse they had been told to expect. A few stop. At least one Sherpa reportedly tried for perhaps an hour to give him oxygen and move him. But an immobile climber at 8,500 meters, in the death zone, is beyond almost any rescue. To carry him would mean risking every rescuer's life. David Sharp died in that cave. And when the world learned that dozens had walked past a dying man on their way to a photograph, it recoiled. Even Edmund Hillary, the first man up, spoke out in anger, saying he was horrified that people would leave someone to die to reach the top. But those who were there described an impossible calculus. At that altitude, on that terrain, with those resources, there may have been nothing they could do. Only one certainty: to try might have meant more bodies, not fewer. Where does ambition end and cruelty begin, in a place where the air itself is trying to kill you? There is no clean answer. The mountain does not offer one. Not far from that cave, on a slope on the northeast ridge, there was for years a woman in a purple jacket. Her name was Francys Arsentiev. In May 1998, she became the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, climbing alongside her husband, the accomplished Russian mountaineer Sergei Arsentiev. It was a genuine achievement, accomplished by only a tiny fraction of climbers. But on the descent, in the death zone, they became separated in the dark. Francys collapsed, and when climbers found her the next day, she was still alive. Barely. British climber Ian Woodall and South African climber Cathy O'Dowd abandoned their own summit attempt to try to help her. For more than an hour they tried, but her legs would no longer hold her weight. Her body was ravaged by frostbite and hypoxia, and they had no way to move her down. In her final hours, half conscious, she repeated the same phrases over and over, words that have haunted mountaineering ever since. She said, "Don't leave me." She asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" They had to leave her. There was, they said, nothing else to be done. Meanwhile, Sergei, having made it down, turned around and climbed back up into the death zone to find his wife. He never came back. His body was located the following year. Frostbite had given Francys's skin a smooth, waxen, porcelain quality. For nearly a decade, She lay on the route in her purple jacket, and climbers called her the Sleeping Beauty. In 2007, Ian Woodall, unable to forget her, returned in a mission he called the Tao of Everest and moved her body away from the trail, wrapping her and laying her to rest out of sight. He had spent 9 years unable to escape the memory of leaving her. Green Boots, Sleeping Beauty, Rainbow Valley, the grim nickname for a stretch below the summit, littered with the brightly colored downsuits of the fallen. These are the landmarks of Everest. Not peaks, not rocks. People. The mountain keeps them, and it makes the living walk past. But why does it keep them? Why, in an age when we can fly helicopters and drop supplies from drones, do 200 human beings remain frozen on a mountain, unrecovered, some for decades? The answer is the death zone, again. And the answer is money, again. And the answer is a moral question that has no clean solution. A human body, at sea level, is heavy and awkward to carry. A human body, at 8,500 meters, frozen solid, often fused to the ice, is very close to immovable. It can take a team of experienced climbers many hours simply to free one corpse from the ice, chipping with axes, pouring boiling water to loosen the mountain's grip. One recent recovery took 11 hours just to release the body before the far more dangerous work of lowering it could even begin. And every one of those hours is spent in the zone where the rescuers themselves are dying cell by cell. The cost is staggering in both senses. A single high-altitude body recovery can run from $30,000 to $70,000. And it is not only money that is spent. People have died trying to bring down the dead. In the cold logic of the mountain, retrieving one corpse can create another. So most families are told the same terrible thing: your loved one will remain where they fell. The mountain is now their grave. This has forced the climbing world into an ethical position that would be unthinkable almost anywhere else on Earth. Many mountaineers and many grieving families have come to accept that Everest is a legitimate final resting place, that there is a kind of dignity in leaving a climber on the mountain they loved enough to die for. Nepal now requires climbers to carry insurance that covers body retrieval, an attempt to reduce the number who are simply abandoned. But full recovery remains, for most, impossible. And it is worth pausing here to correct a popular misconception. Everest is the mountain with the most deaths. It is not the deadliest mountain. Far more people attempt Everest than any other high peak, so the raw toll is large. But the death rate, the chance of dying for each person who tries, has fallen dramatically. Before 1990, it ran above 5%. Across the most recent decade, roughly 2015 to 2025, it has fallen to somewhere around 0.7%. Better gear, better forecasting, better fixed ropes. Researchers analyzing a century of expeditions found that in the earlier era, about a quarter of deaths above 7,000 meters were linked to deteriorating weather. Between 2007 and 2024, they recorded no weather-related deaths at all. Sit with the strangeness of that. Everest has been getting safer, per climber, even as its graveyard has been getting larger. Both things are true, and the reason is simply that the crowd keeps growing. The deadliest of the great peaks, by rate, is K2, the world's second highest mountain, where the terrain is more technical and the margin for error thinner. But K2 does not haunt the public imagination the way Everest does, because K2 is not the highest, and it is the highest that people are willing to die for. The mountain keeps them. Not out of malice. It has no malice. It keeps them because we cannot afford, in blood or in dollars, to take them back. So we return to the question, the one we have been carrying since the beginning. Why? Why go, knowing all of this? Part of the answer is money, and it flows in a direction worth naming. In 2026, Nepal issued a record 492 permits for Everest, at a newly raised fee of $15,000 per climber, up from $11,000. That single season brought in around $7 million in Everest permit fees alone. Climbing Everest is now a multi-million-dollar industry, and for the country of Nepal, one of the poorer nations on Earth, the mountain is an economic lifeline. But the fee is only the beginning of the cost. A full guided Everest expedition typically runs from $40,000 to well over $100,000. And that money buys something the client rarely fully sees: the labor of the Sherpas. Here is a statistic that should stop you cold. Of the 339 people recorded dead on Everest across its whole history, 207 were expedition members. The other 132 were hired workers, overwhelmingly Sherpas. Nearly 4 out of every 10 deaths on this mountain belong to the people who were paid to be there. And they do not die where you would expect. A 2025 study in the Journal of Physiology found that while roughly 3/4 of foreign climbers who die do so on summit day, more than 80% of Sherpa deaths happen during route preparation, fixing ropes, and hauling loads through the deadliest sections. Above all, the Khumbu icefall. The average altitude of a fatal accident for a Sherpa is around 6,900 meters. For a client, it is nearly 8,000. They die lower on the mountain, earlier in the season, doing the work that keeps the clients alive. The Khumbu icefall is the first great obstacle above base camp, a frozen river of shifting ice blocks, some the size of houses, that can collapse without warning. Sherpas cross it dozens of times each season, ferrying equipment. Clients cross it a handful of times. The math of who is exposed to the danger is not equal, and it never has been. In April 2014, a serac, a tower of ice, collapsed in the Khumbu icefall and killed 16 Sherpas in a single morning. It was, at the time, the deadliest day in the mountain's history. It sparked a strike, a reckoning, a demand for better pay and insurance and respect. The following year, in April 2015, a massive earthquake struck Nepal, triggering an avalanche that tore through base camp and killed around 18 people. 2 consecutive years, 2 catastrophes. And in both, the Sherpa community bore the heaviest weight. The men and women who make Everest possible are the ones most likely to die on it. That is the part the summit photographs never show. The year is 2023. It is one of the deadliest seasons in the mountain's history. 18 deaths, driven not by a single storm, but by overcrowding, by climbers spending too long in the thin air, by traffic jams in the death zone, where every wasted minute burns oxygen you cannot spare. The year is 2026, the busiest season ever recorded. On May 20th, in a single day, 274 people reached the summit from the Nepal side, shattering the old record. Photographs from those days show something that looks less like exploration and more like a queue, a line of climbers, hundreds of them, clipped to a single fixed rope, inching up an icy ridge in the death zone, waiting their turn to stand on top. That crowding is itself a hazard. When you must wait in line at 8,700 meters, you are burning through oxygen and body heat with every motionless minute. The summit is not the finish line, the descent is. And the descent is where Everest collects most of its dead. The 2026 season proved it. 5 people died. Now look at where. The first, Lakpa Dendi Sherpa, 52, never even reached the climbing. He collapsed in early May while hiking up toward base camp on the approach trail and died. He was on his way to the mountain, not on it. The second was Bijay Gimire Bishwakarma, 35, who died of a suspected cardiac arrest on the 10th of May while moving up through the Khumbu icefall. He carried a distinction that says something about Nepal as well as about Everest. He was the first person from the Dalit community, the bottom of the caste hierarchy, to have summited this mountain. A man who had climbed out of one system died inside another. The third was Fura Gyalgen Sherpa, 21 years old, the youngest of the dead, who fell on the 11th of May near Camp 3. His grandfather was Ang Rita Sherpa, the man they called the Snow Leopard, who summited Everest 10 times without bottled oxygen. And the last two, Sandeep Arey and Arun Kumar Tiwari, both from India, both clients, both died on the way down, after they had already stood on the summit, after they had already won. 3 Nepali workers, 2 foreign clients, and only the last 2 died anywhere near the top. The mountain does not kill you where you expect it to. Amid all of it, one man went up and came down without incident, as he has done more times than anyone alive. In mid-May 2026, a Sherpa named Kami Rita, in his mid-50s, stood on the summit of Everest for the 32nd time. 32. A world record that belongs entirely to him. He first climbed it in 1994 and has returned almost every year since. He was born in the village of Tham, the same village that produced Tenzing Norgay. And what did the Everest man ask for after his record-breaking climb? Not glory. He called on Nepal to cap the number of permits. He warned about overcrowding, about climbers with too little experience being pushed onto the mountain. The expedition, he said, felt too crowded, and the government should regulate it. The man who has climbed Everest more than anyone in history is asking the world to climb it less. That should tell you something, because the modern mountain is changing in ways that would be unrecognizable to Mallory, or even to Hillary. In recent seasons, a new kind of climb has emerged, the ultra-fast ascent. Wealthy clients now pre-acclimatize at home, sleeping for weeks in tents that simulate high altitude, so they can fly to Nepal, race up the mountain in days, and fly home, skipping the traditional 6 to 8 weeks of slow adaptation that used to be the whole discipline of the climb. In May 2025, that logic reached its extreme. 4 British men, former Special Forces soldiers, went from London to the summit of Everest and back home in about a week. They had prepared not only with hypoxic tents, but by inhaling xenon, an anesthetic gas, in the belief that it would prime their bodies for the thin air. The expedition charged roughly $150,000 a head. The response from the mountaineering establishment was blunt. The International Climbing and Mountaineering Federation issued a medical statement saying there is no evidence that inhaling xenon improves performance in the mountains and that improper use can be dangerous, warning of sedation, respiratory problems, even death. Xenon has been on the World Anti-Doping Agency's prohibited list since 2014. The expedition's organizer defended it as safer, not faster, because it reduces time spent in the danger zone. The critics called it a chemical shortcut around the honest work of adaptation. Speed records are chased with the same intensity. In May 2026, the American runner Tyler Andrews climbed from base camp to the summit in 9 hours and 55 minutes, breaking a mark set by Lakpa Gelu Sherpa back in 2003 by just over an hour. He had hoped to do it without bottled oxygen. The wind made that unwise, and he used it. These are astonishing athletic feats. They are also symptoms of a mountain that has become, for some, less a spiritual undertaking than a product, to be consumed as quickly and efficiently as money allows. And then there is the crowding, which is not a matter of aesthetics, but of life and death. When hundreds of climbers of wildly varying ability are funneled into a 2 or 3 day weather window onto a single fixed rope, the mountain becomes a bottleneck. In 2019, a now infamous photograph showed a conga line of climbers stretching up the summit ridge, hundreds deep, each one stationary, each one burning oxygen and body heat while they waited. Several people died that season, not from any single dramatic event, but from simple delay, too long in the death zone, waiting for a stranger ahead of them to move. Nepal has begun to respond. The permit fee was raised in 2026 for the first time in a decade. New rules have banned solo expeditions on the highest peaks, tightened requirements for high-altitude worker insurance, and there is a proposal, not yet enacted, that would require future Everest applicants to first summit a lesser Nepali peak, above 7,000 meters, to prove they belong there at all. Whether any of it will be enough is another question. As long as the mountain is worth millions and standing on top is worth everything to the person paying, the pressure will keep pushing upward, like the mountain itself. Let us talk then about the people who actually make it possible, not the clients, the Sherpas. The word itself has become a job title in the popular imagination. But Sherpa is an ethnic group, a people, with their own language and Buddhist traditions, centered on the Khumbu Valley. For them, Everest is not a conquest, it is home, and it is holy, and it is, increasingly, the family business. Consider the arithmetic of a single expedition. Before a client ever sets foot in the death zone, Sherpa teams have crossed the deadly Khumbu icefall again and again, fixing the ladders that span its crevasses, hauling tents and food and oxygen bottles to the higher camps. A client might pass through the icefall a handful of times across a season. A rope-fixing Sherpa passes through it dozens of times. The person most essential to the summit is the person most exposed to the mountain's worst. That is why, when a serac collapsed in the icefall in April 2014 and killed 16 of them in a morning, it was not just a tragedy, it was a rupture. Sherpa workers, long treated as background labor in the summit narratives, went on strike. They demanded better insurance, better compensation for the families of the dead, better recognition that they were carrying, quite literally, the weight of the whole enterprise on their backs. The mountain that made careers for foreign climbers had been making widows in the villages of the Khumbu for decades, and the world had barely noticed. Kami Rita, the record holder, has spoken to this directly. He has said that the government does not truly support the guides, that they are famous around the world but neglected at home, that the crevasses are deep and the slopes unpredictable, no matter how good the equipment gets. He climbs, he says, not for records but for his people and his country, because the mountain is what feeds the Solukhumbu district where he was born. The summit belongs, in the photographs, to the client, but the mountain, in every way that matters, belongs to the Sherpas. They are the ones who know it. They are the ones who die for it, and they are the ones who, season after season, walk back into the icefall knowing exactly what it can do. Who is the real mountaineer here? The one who pays, or the one who prepares the way and then does it again the next day? Let us step off the route again. Let us breathe the thin air and look outward. Everest is not only the tallest mountain, it is a scientific sentinel, a place where the changes reshaping our planet show up early and stark. Consider the ice. That South Pole glacier, losing 2,000 years of accumulation in a couple of decades. Consider the Khumbu icefall itself. Guides now report that a knee-deep stream runs where there used to be only solid ice. That water is readily available at Camp 1, where climbers once had to melt snow, that the melt season now begins weeks earlier than it did a generation ago. The International Center for Integrated Mountain Development has warned that glaciers across the Hindu Kush Himalaya could lose up to 80% of their volume by the end of this century. And the melting is doing something eerie. It is giving up the dead. In recent years, as the ice thins, bodies long buried have begun to surface. A hand emerging near a camp, a torso, teeth and bone fragments strewn across newly exposed rock. In April 2026, human remains surfaced near the Khumbu icefall, possibly belonging to one of the 16 Sherpas lost in the 2014 avalanche. Nepal's army now runs an annual cleanup campaign, and in a single recent season, it brought down not only 11 tons of garbage, but also several frozen bodies, chipped free with axes and boiling water, one taking 11 hours to release from its icy grip. The mountain kept its dead for decades in the deep freeze. Now, as the world warms, it is loosening its hold. Sandy Irvine's boot, melting out after 100 years, was not a miracle. It was a symptom. There is a bitter symmetry in it. We climb Everest as an escape from the ordinary world. And the ordinary world's warming reaches all the way up here, to the roof of everything, and starts thawing the graveyard. What kind of monument is a mountain that only returns its dead when the planet has a fever? So, at the end of it all, what is Everest? It is the highest point on Earth, and it is still rising, pushed up by a river it will never meet. It is a goddess to the people who live below it, and a trophy to the people who pay to climb it. It is a scientific instrument measuring the health of a warming world, and it is a graveyard holding roughly 200 human beings in its cold, letting the living file past them season after season. Some of those dead have names we know. Mallory, who vanished into legend. Irvine, whose boot is only now returning. Francys Arsentiev, who asked, "Why are you doing this to me?" David Sharp, who died in a stranger's cave. And the man in the green boots, whom the world called by the wrong name for 30 years, until science finally gave Dorje Morup back his own. Most of the dead have no such fame. They are anonymous shapes in faded-down suits, their families still waiting, in some cases, for a body that will cost $70,000 and another human life to retrieve. So they stay, and the mountain keeps them. Here is the thing that is easy to miss. Standing at the bottom, looking up at that perfect white pyramid. Everest does not know we are here. It does not know Mallory's name, or Tenzing's, or Kami Rita's. It does not know it has a record death toll, or a permit fee, or a line of climbers on its summit ridge. The limestone at its top does not know it was once a seabed. The 200 bodies in its snow are, to the mountain, no different from the stones. It was rising before the first human ever walked its slopes, and it will keep rising after the last one leaves. The river, 75 kilometers away, will keep carving its gorge. The crust will keep rebounding, lifting the peak 2 millimeters higher each year. The wind will keep screaming across the summit at 200 miles an hour, indifferent, eternal, alone. The Indian plate will keep pushing north, as it has for 50 million years, and the mountain will keep growing, long after everyone who ever wanted to climb it is gone. We give the mountain meaning. We give it names and records and rules and grief. The mountain gives us nothing back. Not a summit that stays one. Not an answer to a 100-year-old mystery. Not even, in the end, our own bodies. And yet, next spring, they will come again. Hundreds of them. They will cross the Khumbu icefall in the dark, following the ropes fixed by Sherpas, whose grandfathers fixed the ropes before them. They will climb into the death zone, past the frozen landmarks that were once people with names and children and reasons. And a few of them will stand for 15 minutes in a place where the human body cannot live, and look out over the curve of the earth, because it is there. That is still the only answer anyone has. Right now, in a cave at 8,500 meters, the wind is moving over old stone. The ice is thinning, a millimeter at a time, and somewhere on the slopes above, a boot that has waited 100 years is slowly, patiently, working its way back into the light. The mountain keeps them, for now. If this journey moved you, consider subscribing, and we will see you on the next road.